You're listening to the Paranormal UK Radio Network. Hello? Is that the famous astronomer, Sir Patrick Moore?
It is, very much so.
Any news on the space front?
Quite so. Elon Musk has just designed and developed 5 gigantic, state-of-the-art rocket ships. All members of Parliament, along with the American Senate, have first-class tickets aboard them, you see. They're told they're going to the moon.
Told? Where exactly are they going, Sir Patrick?
The new anomaly discovered recently astronomically. A huge black hole.
Welcome to Twin Souls. Twin Souls is brought to you in association with the Paranormal UK Radio Network, your host Philip Kinsella. Now, ladies and gentlemen, our guest today is none other than the Scottish author, paranormal investigator, lecturer and award-winning guy Malcolm Robinson. He's written so many books. The latest ones are The Detchman Woods UFO Incident, An Ordinary Day, An Extraordinary Event, The Sorky Poltergeists and Other Scottish Ghostly Tales, and this is Malcolm's new one, but I have to tell you that most of the books he's written are incredible. There's so many of them, I haven't got time to list them all here. But we want to welcome our guest Malcolm Robinson, and it's great to have you on board with us. And how are you, Malcolm?
I'm very well, Philip. It's wonderful to be on your show. Yes, looking forward to it.
That's fine. I mean, you're such an esteemed gentleman. I mean, everywhere you look within the field of paranormal, your name comes up, Malcolm Robinson. And, I know that most people shy away from, being known. But you are such a down-to-earth, kind and very loving gentleman. And a lot of people respect you greatly. So I want to ask first of all, because the listeners will want to know, how on earth did you get involved with paranormal and UFO research? What is it that drove you to write all these amazing books and get involved?
Yeah, I mean, basically, Phil, it all stems back from my childhood. I was absolutely fascinated by all things weird and wonderful. And I started to collect a lot of books on the paranormal, etc. And but as I grew older, I felt that, there were no validity to these claims of people seeing ghosts and UFOs. What a load of rubbish. And I set out back in 1979 to do a one-man crusade to prove it. How wrong was I? Because obviously, as I've went through life, I've investigated quite a substantial amount of cases, and there's no smoke without fire. In 1979, I formed my own society entitled Strange Phenomena Investigations, and we are here to look into all aspects, or as many aspects as we can, of strange paranormal phenomena. But this desire that I had, this desire was so strong as a teenager. And as I say, I bought the books of Eric Van Daniken, Jacques Vallée, Charles Bowen, and goodness knows, so many different authors. I watched, like we all do, we watched those wonderful sci-fi films of the 50s and 60s, The Day the Earth Stood Still. I watched The Outer Limits and shows like that, and all that kind of fueled my fire, fueled that passion for me to propel myself into this domain. And it's been with me all my life. But like I said, it was on a sceptical stance, Philip, that I started off. And having said that, even though I'm now a convinced believer in the afterlife and UFOs, etc., which I'll explain in greater detail shortly, we still, as a society, we still try and unmask any fraudulent mediums. We're still here to try and find if there's a rational explanation to account for any given sighting. Of course, that's the norm. That's the norm for any given researcher. That's part of our job, is to look for the natural before the supernatural, and we still do that. Thankfully, I've never truly had the wool pulled over my eyes during investigations as yet, touch wood. But it's one of these things, as a researcher, you still have to be very, very careful of. I remember on one occasion we were dealing with a haunted house in Stirlingshire, and I said to the lady, I said, are you interested in ghosts? And she says, oh, no, not at all. And behind her, Phil, in a little bookcase, was lots of books on ghosts. So you have to be very observant. You got to be observant, And,
that's incredible.
Yeah, it's things like that you've got to look out for. But in the main, people have stories. People want to get things off their chest. They want to come and tell people like me, yourself and your brother, things that's happened to them. We are not experts. I would never, ever class myself as an expert. I know nothing. All I am, Phil, is just a guy with this fascination for all things weird and wonderful. And if I can provide some form of explanation, then absolutely fine. Now, of course, every researcher, I guess, has their own take on UFOs, ghosts, poltergeists. My take may be different, but I like to think that, what I say to people is you can take it with a pinch of salt. You don't need to believe it, but by golly, have a wee look. That's the main thing.
I must reiterate, it is the strange paranormal investigations, but we can also have the Scottish paranormal investigations, and I do apologise.
That's fine. I mean, I felt at that time there was very little going on in Scotland, and I think you had a branch of Bufora in Edinburgh. But generally speaking, way back then, you never had as many UFO and paranormal groups then as you do now. There's so many in Scotland now. And so Scotland certainly needed that. And I got in touch with Ron Halliday. Ron Halliday's a wonderful chap, great investigator. And Ron and I and some colleagues did quite a number of investigations. Oh, I shouldn't forget Ian Shanes. Ian Shanes, Mary Tognan, and Helen Walters were our psychics on those cases. And of course, Alison Dunlop from SPI Scotland is now married Ian Shanes, God bless her. Two wonderful people. So we had the backbone, Phil. We had that, that knit, if you like, of a team who travelled the central belt of Scotland. And we were invited to many, many homes. And there are many tales I can tell you, and I hope to do so on your show.
Yes, I mean, the thing is, it doesn't just range to cases of the paranormal, but also the UFOs. And we know, and you know as well as anyone, of the famous Bonnie Bridge UFO sightings. And I think that is incredible as a main hotspot area. So, I mean, with regards to the paranormal, Malcolm, that you've been, really heavily involved in, what is one of the most prominent cases that has convinced you that that there is an afterlife, or there is a continuation of consciousness beyond this realm?
Well, there's quite a number of cases that would go towards that to change my mind from a skeptic. I'll give you probably the top one, and I have mentioned it on other shows, but for those listeners who are not aware of it, when I lived in London, I lived in Ealing in W5 in London way back in 2000, and I ran SPI meetings in a pub in London. We had so many people come to these meetings. It was we had guest speakers, Reg Presley and a number of other people. And at the end of the lecture, a lady approached me and says, Malcolm, would you like to meet dead people? Now, I'm not going to say, please go away, I'm washing my hair or something. Of course, absolutely. This is why we do it. So to cut a long story short, she invited me to her home on the outskirts of London. And it was just a normal house. And she took me up upstairs to 2 bedrooms. The first bedroom, there was a small unit, a wee glass unit, glass shelves, wooden interior, and there was all these rings and coins on it. I says, what's that? Oh, these are apports, Malcolm. These are things that fell into the seance room, and when you pick them up, they're really, really hot. And there was at least a couple of dozen of them, Phil, all in these little glass shelves, things that fell out, materialised from the other side, so to speak. And each of them had a little tag on it of a date and a time. Then she took us into the back bedroom. It was devoid of any beds or anything. There was a small chest of drawers, which we'll come to in a moment, and there was a taller, slim cabinet, which had a red ambient light on top of it. Now, in the corner to corner of this room was a black, what would you say, like a black curtain. And behind it was a small plastic chair. And I says, yeah, what's going on here? Oh, well, the visiting psychic will be coming up here, Malcolm. He'll sit in that chair behind that cover and he'll go into trance, and spirit will happen, materializations will happen, and fingers crossed you will see this. So I said to the lady, look, can I inspect the room more thoroughly? Yeah, by all means, of course. So I sounded out the wall with my fist to see if there were any hidden cavities in the walls. It sounded solid. I thumped on the floorboards to see perhaps if there was a hidden cavity. And I more or less, I was quite happy by that. I couldn't find anything out to deceive me. So anyway, the psychic medium came up and he looked very nervous, and I patted him down. I patted his chest, his trousers, just like an airport guy, going through security. And I think he was a bit surprised at that. And this was done, of course, just to see if he had brought any gizmos into the room, little telescopic rods or any apparatus. Nothing was on his person. He took his shoes off and he had white socks on, and when he sat in the chair, we tied heavy Velcro straps on his wrists and on his legs to the chair. And we then pulled back the curtain. There were little silver bells tacked onto the wall of this bedroom as well. That becomes apparent in a moment. There were 4 or 5 small plastic chairs facing the corner of the room where this black cloth was, where the medium was sat behind it. And as I say, there was a small chest of drawers sitting next to it as well. All this will become apparent as the story unfolds. And then the lady of the house said, OK, Malcolm, we're going to go to spirit now. We're going to say a few prayers, and then we're going to sing some old, songs, Roll Out the Barrow, all these London songs, etc., just to create that ambience, that theatre, if you like, that so that people can really get into the mood. And apparently it helps spirit along as well. So we did that, and then suddenly these little bells that was tacked onto the wall of this bedroom started to tinkle. There was nobody near it, Phil, nobody. And then suddenly an explosion of voices appeared all over the room. Male, female, young, old, to your left ear, to your right ear, to the top of your head, under your chin, below your chair. And I'm thinking, who's throwing their voice? Because even though I believe in life after death, because I've had so many experiences, who's throwing their voice here? I'm trying to see the other people who was facing the cloth. There was another 3 or 4 people sitting in these chairs, and they were as shocked as I was, And then suddenly this cover, this blanket, this sheet that was covering from the corner of the room to the corner of the room thrust itself out about 5 feet, and it moulded itself into a face contorted and moulded into the very fabric of this kind of curtain-like effect. And it so surprised me, Phil, I really did get a fright at that. And then it came back, bang, and it was flat. And then suddenly the small chest of drawers started to wobble. Now, I should point out, when the lady of the house switched the light off, the small red ambient light on top of the slim wardrobe threw out sufficient ambient light that you could see everybody in the room. Not fantastic, but you could see everybody. Suddenly, this small chest of drawers rose up into the air, right up near enough to the ceiling. It stopped, then traversed about 2.5, 3 feet towards me, and slowly put itself down and touched my toes. And I was absolutely gobsmacked, because I could see that nobody was near this thing. Nobody. And I know this bit sounds silly, and your listeners may sound silly, but I've got to tell it as it is. A spirit voice boomed out. Was Mr. Robinson impressed by this? So I said, I'd be more impressed if you took it back the way. And the voice boomed out, we shall see what we can do. So I did the cardinal sin, and I've mentioned it on other radio shows. I did the cardinal sin of hooking my finger under the lip of this 3-tiered small bedroom chest of drawers and said to myself, this thing is going nowhere. I says, okay, take it away. Go on, take it away. Now, I just can't reiterate how much there were nobody to the left or to the right at this little chest of drawers. So nothing happened. A minute went by, nothing. 2 minutes went by, oh, this is stupid. Nothing's going to happen. And then suddenly this force started pulling at my finger, and I'm trying to pull it back, and it's pulling the other way, and I'm pulling it back, and it just slipped away into the air, rose up into the air, and slowly traversed the room and sat gently back next to this corner of the room. And at that point, Phil, a tremendous burst of cold wind pervaded the whole room like a North Atlantic gale. Suddenly it came into the room and swished about. And I could honestly say that my breath was more or less freezing up. I took an instant chill. And it's one of the most incredible things I've ever seen in my life. I mean, for me personally, how I wished you, your brother, and your listeners had been in that room to see what I'm talking about, because it's a nice wee story, but it's not evidence. For me, it was evidence. I could not explain it. The only downside was, of course, that I wasn't allowed to take any audio or video equipment in the room. Now, if I did, the skeptics may have said, well, Malcolm, wonderful show. You've done that on the computer, haven't you? No. Sometimes you can't convince people, but to answer your question, that was one of the most incredible things that took me off the fence, yeah.
Yeah, it's very interesting because, our understanding of mediumship, I only understand the theoretical part of how, as mediums, the brain is used as a transmitter for information, rather like a mobile phone that's designed to collect signals. And our job is to decipher the information, facts as they come through. And I had myself been in a situation with a poltergeist we'll get to later, that convinced me completely that they are real, and still we don't know what we're dealing with. But what was interesting, going back to the experience that you had with this moving of drawers and the medium being tied down to the chair, I mean, what process do you think that he's going through? I know that I've heard this before about Gordon Higginson and the others using cabinets to somehow, create what they call ectoplasm. But this is incredible. I mean, when you left, what was going through your head, Malcolm?
Just pure wonderment, amazement, shock, the whole plethora of explanatives, I guess. I just couldn't comprehend it, because I just dearly wanted more people, my friends and my colleagues and people like yourself, to have seen that. Because it was wonderful, for sure. And I mean, I'm a great believer in spiritualism. I'm a spiritualist myself. I've had many experiences. I'm going to go through some with your listeners throughout the course of this show. But yes, it was incredible. I'll never ever forget it. Never.
So you wrote the Source Sheep Poltergeist book and Other Scottish Ghostly Tales, which is really incredible. I have read it, and I have to tell our listeners that all Malcolm's books are brilliant. This one really scared me, and I can't believe the size of it, how big the book is, and the cases that you've covered in there. But what was it that got you involved in that particular very famous case, Malcolm?
Yeah, well, let's be honest here. What happened was that initially I was only 3 years of age when the case started. I was born in 1957. Yes, listeners, I'm an old geezer. I really am as old as that, yes. But the case started in 1960. So to answer your question, as I grew up as a teenager, it was the talk of the town. Everybody spoke about this poltergeist, and I was laughing it off at the time. And it wasn't until I was of an age, really getting into the paranormal, that I wanted to learn about this and find out more about this. And I did 3 investigations. The first 2 never got so much response. I got a couple of witnesses and stuff, but my last investigation last year uncovered a number of classmates of Virginia. And so it was really just a story that was ongoing throughout my childhood. I knew I must get involved with. And the story goes, very briefly, because it's a massive case, and very briefly, 11-year-old Virginia Campbell came over from Donegal in Ireland with her parents to a house in Sauchie, where I actually live just now. I live in the town of Sauchie. She didn't want to go. She didn't want to go. She had her friends, a wee dog, Toby, over in Ireland, but they had to go over. And no sooner had little Virginia arrived in the town of Sauchie at Park Crescent, then strange things began to unfold. There was the usual knocking sound. There was rippling of the bed covers. There were things falling off the shelf. She was pinched and prodded. And, our parents, didn't believe it at first. And on one occasion, there was this thumping in the room. So her and her sister went down the stairs, and behind them was like a big invisible medicine ball. Thump, 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 coming behind them. And it wasn't until the parents put them back to bed, they said, come on now, stop this. This is silly. This is nonsense, stupid, stop it. They themselves saw the headboard shaking, etc. Now, things got so bad over that particular week that they called in the local minister, the Reverend T.W. Lund, and he attended the family home. And I guess, he must have been a bit sceptical, but he wasn't sceptical for long, because he too saw strange things in the room, the knockings, the bangings, things falling off the shelf, etc. Then the local GP, the local practitioner, Dr. Logan, attended the home. And what he saw blew his mind. As he came into Virginia's bedroom, she was 11 years old at this time, as I say. She was lying in bed. First of all, he's seen the bed sheets rippling in a rippling movement, as if you threw a stone into a mill pond. You got the ripples, and her hands were on top of the covers, so she wasn't doing it, nor was her legs. At that point, a heavy linen chest, and back in 1960 you had these big long linen chests that stood at the foot of the bed, and they contained blankets and cushions and pillows, etc. That rose up a few inches off the floor, and the heavy lid of this linen chest started to bang, 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 in full view of the doctor. He couldn't believe this. But if things could get any worse, they did. They got far, far worse, because not only did the events transpire in the family home, they followed the poor, unfortunate little girl to her school. And what happened there was several things occurred at the school, all written up in my book. But I'll give you for instance. On one occasion, the teacher had given the class an essay to do. And all the children, and back in 1960, you're talking about 30, 40 pupils in a class back in those days. They're all busy. The heads are down over their desks. They're busy writing away, apart from one little girl, Virginia. She had her forearms left and right, pushing down on the desk lid. And the teacher says, she looked up and says, Virginia, what are you doing? Stop that at once. And then Virginia rose up, raised her forearms from the desk, and the desk lid went crazy. It was flapping up really, really severely. And just then, a desk sitting next to Virginia, an empty desk, nobody was at it, rose up into the air and slammed itself down. On another occasion, Phil, she approached the teacher's desk in 1960, massive, big wooden desk, heavy, really heavy. So Virginia's walking towards this desk with her jotter, with her essay, and she laid it down gently on the teacher's desk. There you go, miss. That's my essay finished. And just then, Phil, there was a cane back in 1960. They had the big blackboards, and they had a cane to point at the blackboard. It was lying flat, and it started to vibrate and vibrate and vibrate and vibrate, and then it stood up on end and started whacking down on the teacher's desk. And then the whole heavy wooden teacher's desk rose up about an inch or so from the floor. And whereas the teacher's stomach was in front of the long part of the desk turned round 90 degrees, and the teacher's stomach was now facing the narrow end of the desk. And at that point, a bowl of tulip bulbs flew off a desk and smashed into the wall. And at that point, it was like a Tom and Jerry cartoon, because all the children in the class rushed for the door to get out the door. And the teacher grabbed the door, and she tried to pull it. And it was like a big, heavy, burly man was on the other side of the door saying, no, nobody's coming out. And she couldn't open the door. She says, I interviewed the teacher. She says, Malcolm, I could not open the door. It was like somebody on the other side was pushing it. And then she calmly said to the children, look, I'm sorry, I do the door must be jammed. And then just like bang, she just almost flew back. The door opened, and all the kids just jammed themselves in the door as they rushed to get away. And during my research for the Sawkey Poltergeist book, we uncovered a number of classmates of Virginia who told the very same story. They were there. They saw that. Not only that, we have uncovered in my research last year for the book that the whole street, Park Crescent in Sawkey, there's at least 3 houses with similar ghostly tales to be told. And I've interviewed the occupants of those houses. Now, it could be pure coincidence that street, the most haunted street in Scotland, or it's maybe something's going on there. We obviously tried to see if there were any hidden or underground workings, if there were any grave sites. You know, you got to tick all the boxes, Phil, as you know. There were no grave sites. It was just farmland, pure farmland, before the houses were built on it. And it's one of the most strangest cases, I mean, I've dealt with here in Scotland. There was also a shaving brush. It's all true. It was a shaving brush. It floated out of the toilet and came out and fell on the floor. Then when Virginia was doing the hoovering, the plastic part of the handle came off the hoover, floated up into the air and smacked her on the nose. So there was a plethora of paranormal events transpiring in that Sawkey house, yeah.
So with the Sawkey case, I mean, what's really interesting, I mean, the research you've done, I mean, you have to be commended. I think you're one of the authors who's really gone into this in a really detailed way. And one of the things that I've always found very curious about poltergeists, you know, for someone myself who never believed in them, and then I found myself involved in a case that's rather sensitive and Stephenish. I'm not, you know, taking anything away here, but when you see it for yourself of what this thing is able to do, it was connected to a young lad, and wherever the young lad went, this same strange things would start to happen. So in your estimation, Malcolm, what do you think a poltergeist is? I mean, you know, even if you were to guess, what would you think it is?
Well, with my books, I always try to provide alternative explanations, but I don't want my readers to think I just know it all and I've got one explanation. So, with the Decament book, for instance, the Decament Woods incident, there was about 11 theories. With the Sawkey Poltergeist book, there was a number of theories as well, and I went through them all. But to answer your question, before I give you the answer to the question, I want to tell you what I believe is not the case. This may rile some other fellow researchers, and that's not a problem. I do not accept for a minute that it's kids going through sexual puberty, young kids going through the change, and this sexual energy is somehow externalizing and pushing things off shelves and making things happen. If that was the case, Phil, would you agree in this day and age, with all the teenagers up and down the country, that you would have a poltergeist nearly in every house if it was sexual energy? So I don't think it's that. I may be wrong. I may be totally wrong. It may be that. But I don't honestly believe that that's the case. What I believe, to answer your question, is that I do believe that it's a troubled spirit. It followed the poor girl over for Ireland. And the story's not finished there, actually. There's more to come, because when the girl was moved to a small town called Dollar in the Hillfoots in Clackmannanshire to see if perhaps things would stop. So they moved her out the house to another house about 3 mile away. It still happened. It still happened in this new house. When Virginia and her family moved away from the area, we didn't know where they went. I put some adverts in Irish newspapers. I thought maybe she'd went back to Ireland. Cut a long story short, we found out she went to the town of Bedford in England. And then thereafter, she went to a small adjacent town near it called Kempston. Now, I spoke to a lady down in Bedford, an elderly lady who knew the Campbells. And she told me, she said, oh, yes, they had a problem in Scotland. Yes, that's right. They had a poltergeist. Yes, yes. Do you know, Malcolm, it actually came down and followed her to Bedford. I went, no, I didn't. I didn't know that. That's news to me. So it appears not only did the poltergeist follow her from the house in Sauchie, followed her to school, followed her to another house in Dollar, it's followed the poor girl down to Bedford. And it's a sad indictment that some people think that ghosts and spirits can't harm you. There's a chapter in one of my previous books which tell people otherwise, that you can be harmed, hurt by flying objects, whether there's a desire for that person to be harmed or it's just unfortunate, I don't know. But it does make you think.
Yes, well, I can tell you, Malcolm, that we ourselves are in Kempston of Bedfordshire, and that's where we are now. And so that's a small world, isn't it?
It's set. In fact, yesterday, this is a funny story. Yesterday, we had a gas man come in to look at our boiler. We had a wee small technical hitch with it. And we got talking, and he saw some of my books, and then he went, oh, my wife was in the same class as Virginia Campbell, that Sauchie poltergeist thing, and I just about fell off my feet.
Oh, my goodness me.
I says, mate, I've just finished a book on that. Never. Yes, I have. Let's talk about a small world. Unbelievable.
Good Lord. I mean, you know, what's incredible, the Sauchie poltergeist, I mean, that is one of the most famous cases, and you got yourself involved right into the meat of that. And not only that, but, you know, not detracting here, especially with the Loch Ness Monster. You wrote The Monsters of Loch Ness, The History and the Mystery, and you were the only Scotsman that's been down in a submarine to investigate, which is incredible. And the Detchment Woods UFO incident also. But I noticed with a lot of your work that, you know, when you actually write your books, I mean, when you're dealing with a certain case, I mean, it's got to be said, you're not just one of these writers who just, you know, skims over it. You really go in for the meticulous research, don't you?
Well, I think it's important to try and cover as many aspects of any given case as possible, because you'll always get the skeptic saying, did you think of that? Did you think of this? And if you don't think out of the box to cover those possibilities, then, you know, you're doing yourself a disservice. But I thank you for your comments. I mean, at the end of the day, the reason why I write books, yourself and fellow researchers, is not to say, look at me, I'm the greatest. It's not that. What it is to get the stories out, get the information out, shove it in front of people's faces. And if they believe it, fine. If they don't, fine. But as long as that information gets out there, I've always said, Phil, that information is for the people and not filing cabinets. You've got to get it out, you know.
Yeah, and you know what's really interesting in the psychic department, I mean, I know I myself have been involved in a lot of experimentation, but one of the things is, I agree with you, there is another side. We understand that consciousness survives the state of death, and the brain is the mere instrument to translate information coming through from that dimension, as we call it. But what's interesting with the poltergeist, not just the Sauchie poltergeist incident, but many other poltergeist instances, this case of apporting objects that are hot. And I know that Steven Spielberg in his film Poltergeist digostat. I have seen that on one occasion. That was with a packet of mints that this thing brought through the ceiling. But what is fascinating is that it tells us, doesn't it, that we are dealing with some type of interdimensional entity. It's something that's using the ether to come through. That's amazing, isn't it, when you think about it?
Yeah, I mean, there's no denying it. These apports are fascinating, and they appear in many different circumstances. I remember myself and Dave Young, were at a venue down somewhere in England. The name escapes me just now, but we were down in the cellars, and suddenly I heard like it was a crack of a whip. It really was sharp, and I went, what the hell was that? So we turned round, we had our torches, and they're spinning on a flagstone in this dark hallway downstairs. It was the Halls of Justice in Nottingham, Phil. Sorry, it just came to me. The Halls of Justice in Nottingham. I was speaking to a group called Paraforce. So we were in the bowels of this building. I heard the crack of the whip, got my torch, saw a spinning stone, a stone spinning of its own accord on the flagstone. I go to pick it up and I almost burnt my hands. It was boiling hot, and I passed it to Dave Young, and he confirmed it. And it's the only apport that other than was shown in that lady's house. It's the only one I've physically had to deal with, But when you look at emanations, you made a good point there. I gave a lecture to a psychic group in Bournemouth a couple of years or so ago, and they were doing an experiment on psychometry. And I visited Auschwitz-Birkenau a few years ago, and I took some stones from the railway tracks and also from the crematoria that the Russians demolished when they liberated the camp. And I keep them in a special wee box. And they were looking at this psychic event. They were looking for things to psychometrize and watches and this and that. And so I said, okay, I'll take this stone. So I gave it to one psychic, and I popped it in her hand. And you should have seen her face, Phil. She was in terror. She screamed out, "What are you giving me? What is this? I see horror. I see distress. I see, oh, this is horrible. Oh, no, take it away, take it away, take it away." And she didn't want it. And then she says, "What the hell are you gave me?" I says, "That was a stone from Auschwitz-Birkenau." And that would explain it. And that in itself, when we talk about apports and we talk about psychometry from apports or just normal things, it's fascinating.
Yeah, and it's, the same can be said as well for a lot of the paranormal mysteries, not just with poltergeists, as in the case with Sorky and many other well-known cases. I mean, Sorky in Scotland is one of the most famous cases, and I think the world knows all about it. But this whole theory about poltergeists supporting things, coming through the ether on some level. We see this as well in cases of national parks in America, where 1 minute a person is standing in front of a group of people and the next minute they turn around, they're gone, and then they appear or they're found many, many miles away. And UFOs, as well, as we know, we assume theoretically that they may be using interdimensional travel. I'm not saying that they're all connected, but with regards to poltergeists, it does show us that if there's troubled souls, they're existing on another level altogether of dimensions. And you're right. I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I've read your works. I think you're right in your assumption. This is not linked with puberty. That's the most craziest theory ever brought forward. And it's like any of the mysteries that we deal with. You always get someone coming up with something that everyone agrees with, but is absolutely ridiculous. It's as though they cannot accept the most impossible answer that they don't want to address. So, you've been on television, national television, you've been on radio, you're so famous, Malcolm, that, I know that sometimes, as I said before, people say, oh no, but you are, and you're very well respected, and you're a man who is no nonsense. You have an open mind, but you are meticulous within your research, and you stand as one of the great researchers within our time. So what other cases have you been involved with lately, Malcolm? What have you been up to?
Well, I've just relocated back to Scotland after 23 years living in England.
Yes.
So I've just came back to live in the town of Sauchie, and it's great to be back. I've got a lot of plans for SPI here in Scotland, but that'll bear fruit as the months roll on. So haven't done any major investigations over the last couple of years. But the cases that we worked on a few years ago, going back a touch, were sufficient to again fuel that fire of interest. And a couple of quick for instances, I've mentioned these before, but a couple of quick for instances, we were dealing with a case when I lived in Scotland. And the reason I say that is because it's great evidence for me. And what it was a haunted house in Tullabuddy, a small town near Alloa, and it's also near Sauchie. And the lady was very, very, very distressed by paranormal happenings. And we have to ensure, Phil, as any researcher will do, that they're not on medication. We have to ask them, excuse me, madam, yes? Are you taking any particular medications? And if so, what is it? Because it could be a medical episode. We have to make sure it's not a medical episode. So we convinced ourselves that this lady wasn't, hallucinating and wasn't taking drugs and what have you. She was an elderly lady anyway. That's not to say they don't take drugs, but I'm sure they do. But it was, we satisfied ourselves that she was kosher, and we went upstairs to this room, and we had all the recording equipment going, the video cameras, audio equipment. And we always work in darkness. We always have a psychic with us. And suddenly, and it was all dark, and nothing was happening. Oh dear. Why do I do this? Why do I get involved in this? Maybe I should take up swimming or fly fishing or something. Nothing was happening. And then suddenly, bang, it did happen. And what happened was that the whole room illuminated by thousands and thousands of tiny pinpricks of electric white light, sparkling light, like a November the 5th child sparkler, the handheld sparklers, all over the walls, all over the ceiling, all over the bedclothes, all over the carpet, all over your clothes. And I turned to our psychic and I said, what the hell is this? And she very calmly says, Malcolm, don't you know, this is pure psychic energy. Oh my goodness me, I love it. But it was like a dimmer switch. It was like someone had a dimmer switch on the wall, and it slowly, after about 19, 20 seconds, it dissipated, and the room was engulfed in blackness again. So with fingers crossed, we walked over to the VCR equipment, press stop, press rewind, press play, and with bated breath, please, you must have captured this, please, press play. Nothing was there. And it's so disappointing, Phil, but would skeptics have accepted that even if we had have got it,
Yeah, and it's like the X-Files, Mulder and Scully. They were there in the meat of it all, and then at the end they were left with, did it happen? They had to question what was going on. And I know it happens to you, but the evidence disappears. And certainly with psychic phenomena, the lights, you're correct, are seen, the white, they come in different colors. We're trying to work out what the different colors mean, because obviously light retains information. So this definitely proves that we are dealing with another dimension of reality. People call it heaven, the other side, Nevada, any of these things at all, but we know that we're dealing with something that is operating on a different level of reality. I mean, so obviously there must be multiple layers within these dimensions of the afterlife.
Yes, I totally agree. I think the answer lies in dimensions. We were doing a Zoom with Kathy Cogliano, Alien Bill Rourke, and some other people last night, and we were talking about dimensions, and I think that's where the answer lies to a big degree, is the dimensional shift, things coming through. I mean, even in the Bob Taylor case, the object he saw was solid 1 minute, then the next second it dematerialized, then solidified. So that, in a sense, is like a dimensional thing, yes.
Yeah, the Deckmont Woods UFO incident. I mean, I remembered that as a kid reading about that. I mean, that was in all of the paranormal magazines that were released, certainly within the late 80s and going forward. And you actually investigated that, and you went to see all the witnesses and went through it all again. And that is another amazing book within itself. And yes, these UFOs, I think, are using perhaps interdimensional forms of transport. And perhaps this is that's why, you know, with the poltergeists activity, when they apport objects, they're burning hot. And I know that because there was a situation once where these mints, when this poltergeist was going AWOL that was linked with this boy, there was a crack, and then through the ceiling something dropped, and it was a half-eaten packet of mints. God knows where it got it from. So they know how to get things, or they transport things from one area to another of space and time. So and so have you got any more, you know, creepy tales to tell us, Malcolm, with your amazing investigations?
Well, this could be one of your longest radio shows ever, so are you prepared? But getting onto the light thing, I mentioned about the sparkly lights. There was something similar around about that time as well. We were doing another investigation. Now, this one was totally different, because the lady concerned claimed that she was being sexually molested by a spirit. And I've never, ever dealt with a case of this in my whole life. And so it was quite spectacular, to say the least. We went there, long story short. You could clearly see she was distressed. She wasn't, again, on drugs or any hallucinations, anything like that. She said of an evening she'd lie down and she'd feel a pressure on her chest. I mean, there was a movie in America called The Entity, I think it was, along that kind of lines. So, to cut a long story short, my then girlfriend at the time and I went outside for a cigarette, and we left our psychic with the lady, and the lady was sitting in the middle of the room in a chair. So me and my girlfriend at the time walked back into the house. I sat down in one chair, my girlfriend sat down in another chair. I looked at the lady sitting, shaking on the chair in the middle of the sitting room, and then suddenly, bang! Yet again, these beautiful, but this time it was beautiful, small, inch-long, aquamarine, bluey, shimmering lights were falling from her head, from her shoulders, all around her body. And I let out a big, girly scream. And my girlfriend screamed, Malcolm, can you see it as well? Can I see it? Can I see it? I can bloody well see it, all right. And the poor lady, she's going, what? What is it? What is it? And it only lasted again maybe 20, 30 seconds. And I said to the psychic, what on earth have we just seen there? She says, well, Malcolm, when you were outside having a cigarette with a girlfriend, I administered psychic healing on the lady because, as you can see, she's quite distressed. And this is purely just to calm her down. So what you saw was the remnants of my psychic healing just fluctuating, moving around her body. And it's times like that, Phil, you're not expecting to see stuff like that. It just suddenly happened, you know. I mean, I'm not psychic. Yes, I've put myself into psychic environments, and I've had the odd thing, you know, I've had my hair pulled, I've been kicked by nothing. But as a rule, I'm not truly psychic, but I experience certain things. Just before I left to come up to Scotland, I was in the toilet. This is a terrible story, this. And I was looking down at my feet, and just one solitary blue aquamarine light just materialised at my foot and then dematerialised and was gone. Like the true skeptic I can be, I rubbed my eyes thinking, Malky, did you really see that? What's going on? So things happen to me at a time when you least expect it. My mother sadly passed the spirit in December there.
Yes, I'm sorry.
That's thank you. And I've been trying to get in touch with her, you know, please, Mother, come and see me, put the lights out, do this, do that. And there have been a number of things. It's transpired. Just before we left Hastings in East Sussex to come to Scotland, I was watching TV and there was a small table lamp on a bookcase. Started to flicker, on and off. And I says, okay, is that you, Mum? Stop it. It stopped. Okay, do it again. Start it again. On and off. Again, it could have been coincidence. Maybe the bulb was going. That's how sceptical even I still am, Phil, you know. And it's terrible. Then her sister, my Aunt Mamie, phoned me last week. And so I'm on the phone to my mum's sister. And my mum's sister's going, oh, your mother liked to do this, Malcolm. Oh, she did. Oh, and see the times we went out here and we went there. Oh, and I'm waiting to tell you this, Malcolm. We did, bang. Suddenly all the lights went out in my living room. The whole house was engulfed in blackness. So I'm immediately thinking, okay, it's a power cut. The whole street must be out. So I goes, looks out the window. No, it's not. All the lights are on. So there was a switch that had been tripped, admittedly. All the switches were up. One was down. I flicked it up. Now, that is either coincidence or my mother, because her sister was on the phone to me, talking all about her. She decided to do something. So, it's wee things like that. It makes me wonder what's going on.
Yeah, people get signs. At the end of the day, this happens to a lot of people, and they're done in subtle ways and not too big a ways, just to get your attention. I have seen, two people build up only on two occasions. One was experimental. That was to do with Dr. Raymond Moody's experiment with mirrors. And what's interesting is that mirrors, glass as well, are kind of like doorways. Neil Geddes Ward has said that, when you see lights, and interestingly, you mentioned the bathroom, because I've seen a few of them in there as well. And he said, do you realize why? And I said, no. He said, because it's a small contained area. This is why mediums use cabinets to build up the energy. I mean, sometimes you don't even know you're building up the energy, but this is very interesting with doorways, windows, openings, anything like that. They need some type of portal to work through. But I wouldn't be at all surprised if your beloved Ma is trying to get through to you to say, hey, Malcolm, you're the author, you're the researcher, you're all of these things, and I'm trying to tell you that I am here. And so you don't want her to do any dramatics, like really, to get your attention, Malcolm. So
yeah,
I think it might be.
I know. And I mean, I do intend to attend a local spiritualist church here in Alloa, nearby town, and maybe Edinburgh and Glasgow, because there's certain things that I did. I can't say anything on this show because obviously I'll give it all away.
Yeah.
But there's certain things that I did for my mother's grave that only I know and I alone know. And if I have any psychic that can tell me what I did with my mum's grave and certain things that was put in her coffin, that would be wonderful news. Now, skeptics might say, well, it's maybe mind reading, Malcolm. Somehow they're getting into your mind. They're picking it up, like Darren Brown and all these magicians, etc., and conjurers. I don't know, but it's like Harry Houdini. He had a certain code. He knew that if his mother would come back through a psychic, he would get that code. So it's a waiting game. I'll wait to see.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, when people say mind reading, that in itself is a form of distant cognizance, and it's incredible. So that they'll try and label anything that is something that can be humanized or something that can be basically understood. Oh yes, the mind reader, but that in itself is incredible because you're attaching your mind to their mind, like remote viewing, astral projection, all these types of things. But I've never believed that anything that mediums do is like a process of mind reading, because there are some things that they bring through that the person that's being read for doesn't know until they go and find out from the family. For instance, I went to go and see a medium many years ago, and the medium brought through a guy who was in the Navy who drowned. I didn't know who he was. Went back home and found out that he was the brother to my grandfather, who died drowning when he was about 17 years of age. And see, so that can't be mind reading, Malcolm.
Absolutely, and when you're talking about that, I remember interviewing an old lady some many years ago. She was a good age herself, and the story she told me was that she lived in North London, and it was during the Second World War, and she was sitting on her chair in the North London home doing some knitting. Her son was fighting the Nazi U-boat menace in the North Atlantic, and she hadn't heard from him for a while. And then suddenly it was like this magical television screen just appeared in this front room in North London. And she could see her son thrashing about in the cold waters of the North Atlantic, his last moments on Earth. And she could hear, "Mother, Mother." And suddenly the image just disappeared. Now, this wasn't in her mind's eye, Phil. Sometimes it can be, as you know. This was externalised. It's externalised into the front room. And needless to say, I think you know what's coming. About 3 weeks later or so, she got a telegram, obviously pre-Facebook and all the rest of it. Many years to come. She got a telegram, and in it said, "Sorry to say that your son passed away on that such and such a date, and that date was the very same day, the very same time as she saw her last image of her son traverse from the North Atlantic into this front room in North London. And I think that's a wonderful story, and she wasn't expecting it. Some people may say, well, if your son is fighting, he's in the Second World War, he could die. Yeah, of course. But it's still an interesting story, yeah.
Yeah, and I just find it so fascinating. You find it so fascinating. I mean, I have to say here to the listeners that Malcolm Robinson was the first famous researcher who gave me praise for some of my work, and I will never, ever forget that. I don't know if you remembered, it was to do with Believe, bridging the gap between the psychic and UFO phenomena. You wrote a review for me, and I still have the review. And people don't forget, Malcolm, I can tell you that now, because your work and your books and your research, I mean, as I said before, you're a nice guy. You're very meticulous within your research, and you've covered UFOs and psychic phenomena. I'm really happy that you're back up in Scotland, because I know you're in Hastings, but there was a part of you, I always felt there was a part of you that wanted to go back home, and I think that is beautiful that you've obviously encountered some tragedies. I'm sorry, and unfortunately you have, but now it's time to rebuild your life, which is what everyone wants you to do. So I've got to ask, because we're coming to the end of the show, and I need to ask this question: are you working on any new books, Malcolm? Are we allowed to ask you that?
Of course, yeah. And Philip, many thanks for your kind words there. I really appreciate it. And but that book, the first book was really, really good book, and that's why I gave it a glowing review, because it struck a chord with me. In your writings, it struck a chord, and I just felt that you're on the right path. To answer your question, am I writing any new books? Boy, I've got I've got plans for a number of books. I'm going to give it a couple of months, because I've got to clear my feet of other things that I've got to do, because we're not long moved up to Scotland. And once I get that sorted out, it'll be in my office, head down, in the laptop, and I'm kind of stuck between how I'm going to frame this, because I want to do a book on UFO abductions, and I also want to tell the stories of people's abductions that's been writing to me over the course of a number of years that I've never put in the other books. Then I've got so many people writing to me from all over the world with their own strange stories, and they need to be told, they need to be heard. So yes, I do have a number of books in the pipeline, and I will certainly love to come on your show at a later date and talk about them. But yeah, I'm looking forward to really getting my hands dirty and getting back into writing again. Yeah.
Yeah, at the end of the day, I mean, you disappeared from, the media for a while, and everyone was asking where you were, and they're so delighted that, now that you're back and you're back on the circuit. But we're so proud to have you on board Twin Souls, and we're so honored also, not just because you're such a nice guy, but also of the amazing work that you've done, the television, the radio, the lecturing, the authorship, the investigations, the awards that you've won as well, because you're an award-winning, UFO and paranormal investigator for your writings and your research. I just think it's so amazing, and it's so nice also to link with someone who is really a gentleman. So it's hats off to you from not only me but many other people who I do know, and I'm not one of these people who just says it, but I do know that has the greatest of respect for you. So we wish you luck with your future books. And just one last question before we end the show, with regards to the Sawkey case. I mean, are you still in touch with the Victoria, the people there at all? Are you still connected?
No, we're still, although we know that she moved to Bedford and Kempston, which is your area, actually.
Yes.
We sent a journalist down. I was still living in Hastings at the time, and he went to an address. He looked at all the Campbells in the phone book for Kempston, and he narrowed it down. There weren't that many, believe it or not. It's quite a common name. But anyway, he went to this woman's door, knocked on the door. Yes, can I help you? And this journalist who I got to do this said, Malcolm, I spoke to this lady. She would have been quite elderly, and she she was very reticent to come forward with any questions, with any answers to my questions. And Malcolm, he says, I firmly believe I was speaking to Virginia Campbell, but she denied that she was Virginia. And I'm going to follow up on that and see what we can do. I'm still chasing down some other classmates of Virginia. It was many years ago. Some have died, some have moved on. But and it's always the case. When I finished the Socky Poltergeist, I had about 5 people who was also in Virginia's class come forward. But it's too late now. They know the book's out. But we can maybe do an amendment on that.
Well, yes, that's amazing, and we wish you luck with that. And also, people can find you. Your books are on Amazon. I know that they've been translated into different languages as well, which is awesome. And your case of the Sorky Poltergeist and Loch Ness and the Dutchman UFOs. I mean, my goodness, I don't think there's an area of the paranormal that you've left uncovered. It's amazing. So it's really brilliant to work, brilliant researcher. So where can people find you, Malcolm?
They can find me on Facebook. I don't at the moment have a website. But they can also email me with if they've got any stories to tell, maybe photographs that they would like to pass on to me. It's Malky, that's MALCKYSPI @yahoo.com. Drop me an email. It'd be lovely to hear from you, and we can take it from there. Like I say, I don't have the answers, but I'll certainly give you what I think is going on.
Wonderful. And it just remains for me to say thank you very much, Malcolm, for having us on the show. And we wish you the best of luck with your work. And you're a smashing guy. And really, our listeners will find your experiences and your books and research absolutely amazing. So I just say to people, go and check out Malcolm Robinson's books on Amazon, and also the Sorky Poltergeist and Other Scottish Ghostly Tales is one that you need to buy, because it will give you the willies. You won't be able to sleep at night when you've read that.
It gave me the willies as well.
So thank you so much, Malcolm, and all the best to you. And
thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you very much, Malcolm. And you've been listening to Twin Souls, your host, Philip Kinsella, Malcolm Robinson, our esteemed guest. Please, all of you, stay safe and watch the skies.